You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands.
Welcome to the Church of Lake Forest. How are y'all doing this morning? Yeah, all right, good. I'm glad. Are y'all excited about Christmas? Nobody's excited about Christmas. Great. I'm so glad. Because today's the 8th, so that means we've got 17 shopping days left, right? Raise your hand if you're like me and you've not bought a single Christmas present. All right, good. There's a few of you out there. Yeah, this is a short shopping season. I have not even started. I don't know what we're going to do. I think we're going to start this afternoon maybe and go buy like 2 or 3 things. I don't know. It's sort of snuck up on me. But Christmas is an exciting time of year. Christmas is when kids go crazy. A lot of times it's when adults go crazy, when grown men turn into little boys again, and you sit on the floor, especially if you've got little boys, and, whatever their toys are, their video games, their Legos, sometimes they drive you crazy because you have to help them put them together. And then sometimes you love it because you get to help them put them together and play with them. It just depends on what it is. But we get to have a lot of fun during the Christmas season, and it's an important time for us, right? Because, I've said this before, as a church, as the church, this is one of the 2 times a year that Jesus did something that nobody else has ever done nor can ever do that draws a crowd, right? Everybody knows Christmas. Everybody knows the holiday, even if they don't really completely understand the reason for the season. When Jesus was born of a virgin, Mary, and when he rose again after dying at Easter, and he rose again on Easter, those 2 events in the life of our church and in the life of every church around the world draws a crowd. It's an event where this is the time of year where people are open, right? So on your way out the door, I don't want you to forget, grab some invite cards, right? They say come to worship on one side, which is our current series. Then on the other side, we've got the Christmas on the Bluff for our Christmas Eve series. Grab those, invite people next week, but invite them to Christmas Eve. This, like Easter, is one of those times in the year when people are they're expecting to get invited to church. They're expecting you to say Merry Christmas, right? I mean, if you haven't already started saying Merry Christmas when you visit people, when you go to Walmart and you're checking out, or you're walking out of the gas station, or you're going to the hairdresser. I mean, I visit that all the time. Wherever you go, on your way out the door, start saying Merry Christmas. And when you say Merry Christmas, just add to it, hey, I'd love to invite you to my church, and hand them an invite card. People are expecting it this time of year. And it's a huge time of year because we get to have a lot of gifts, and we get to spend a lot of money and go into a lot of debt. And what I want us to do this year is just talk about Jesus, right? Because the Christmas season is busy enough, and it's busy enough just going and shopping and going to the Christmas parties, and we've got a couple of Christmas parties scheduled on the same night, right? So Stephanie's going to be at one Christmas party, and I'm going to be at another Christmas party, and I don't know where our kids are going to be. They may be at grandparents' house and maybe at home. I don't know. But Christmas, we're spread thin. We're running around everywhere. But it's about Jesus, right? I mean, Christmas is about Jesus. This whole season is about Jesus. So what I want us to do this year, we're going to have 4 messages. This is a 4-message series. This week, next week, the Sunday right before Christmas, and then, of course, Christmas Eve will be the finale of this series. But it's called Come to Worship. And what I want to do is talk about worship. We're focusing on Jesus, but really our response to who God is and what God has done for us. We're going to focus purely on worship for the next 4 weeks. And the message title comes from the Christmas story. It actually comes from Matthew chapter 2, the wise men going to visit Jesus. It'll be on the screen. I think it's in your notes. Matthew 2:2 says this, this is the wise men, right? So they've shown up in Bethlehem. They're looking for Jesus, and they say, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." Here are some men. We don't know exactly how many. We know they brought 3 gifts. There might have been 3. There might have been 1 or 2. It says men, so it had to be at least 2. But there might have been a multitude. They probably traveled with scribes. I mean, these guys were well-versed. They probably saw this star, and they were students of astronomy, and they were looking at the stars. They were looking for signs. They were probably students of history and prophecy. Most likely they came from somewhere in the Middle East, like maybe Iran or Iraq, somewhere in that area, maybe even from the Chinese area. We don't know exactly where they came from. But they didn't come to get something from God. And it wasn't like they jumped in their SUV, their 8-seat camel, and just like drove, across town to go visit Jesus. It's not like they jumped in their 50 mile per gallon camel hybrid, right? And it took an overnight trip to go visit family. No, these guys probably studied the stars, and when they saw the star, they probably studied ancient manuscripts, maybe even some of the Old Testament, maybe some of the ancient Jewish manuscripts, and they figured out that something was going on, that this was a sign, and that God was up to something. And they may have even studied it for a year or more, because we think they showed up around the time that Jesus was maybe about 2 years old. And they traveled not just for an hour or two or a day or two. We don't know exactly where they come from, but it says that they traveled from a far distance. They came from a long way, and they didn't come to get something. They came to give something. Listen, that's why we give gifts at Christmas, but we enjoy getting gifts. But the reality is, worship is not about us getting anything. I think we have this tendency in the American church, in the Western Christian church, of coming to church on Sunday morning to get something, right? We want to get filled up. We want to see our friends. We want to fellowship. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that, right? We want to fellowship. We want to learn. I want to be able to feed you the Word of God. And we come with this expectation that I'm going to get something. I'm going to get something. I'm going to get something. And then what happens is, eventually, you get to the point where you don't feel like you're getting anything anymore. And then you get a little complacent, and maybe you get a little fed up with the pastor or the worship or the small group leader or whatever. And then you go somewhere else because you're searching for another church that can feed you, another place that you can go to get something else. But listen, that's not what worship is all about. God does not exist for us. If you're taking notes, write it down. God does not exist for us. If you don't know this yet, let me make sure you get it this morning. God does not exist for us. We exist for Him. We're here for His benefit. And yeah, we will benefit. Actually, we're not here for His benefit. We're here for His glory. We're here to love Him. We're here to praise Him. The reason that we're here this morning primarily is to worship. Yes, we'll learn. Yes, hopefully we will be fed. Yes, our hearts will be filled up. We'll kind of get our tanks full so we can go through the rest of the week. But worship is about God. And worship is not just on Sundays. We have this tendency to think, well, I'm gonna come on Sunday and God is like this. He's like this genie, right? He's like this cosmic vending machine that if I show up on Sundays, maybe I come on Wednesday nights, maybe I get my kids involved in Awana, which is an amazing thing. Maybe my students come to switch on Sunday nights. My kids come to Awana on Wednesday nights. I come to prayer meeting. I'll come on Sunday morning. I'll sing some songs. I'll listen to the pastor. I'll even take notes, right? And if I pray just right, if I think the right things, I'll even drop a little bit of coin in the offering box. I'll sort of tip God, and we think if we do the right things, we put the right amount of money in, we push the right buttons, then God's just going to drop these blessings in our laps. But He doesn't exist for us. We exist for Him. And worship is all about what we can give back to God. It's about us glorifying God for what He's done for us. So this Christmas season, these 4 messages are about 4 different postures of worship. 4 different postures of worship. Now listen, worship encompasses a lot of things. If this won't be on the screen, but if you're taking notes, you might want to write this down. The definition that I use for worship is living a lifestyle of obedience. Living a lifestyle of obedience to God, not because you have to, but because you want to. Living a lifestyle of obedience to God, not because it's some duty or He forces you to. You got to come to church on Sunday morning because that's the right thing to do. No, it's living day in and day out according to Romans 12, 1 and 2. It's taking my everyday, ordinary life and putting it at the feet of God. I become a living sacrifice for Him physically, not just on Sundays, but on Monday through Saturday too. And as I live that lifestyle of physical sacrifice to God, Romans 12, 1 and 2 teaches us that that's our spiritual form of worship. That it's a lifestyle of obedience to God, again, not because we have to, but because we get to. And there's lots of things that we can do to worship God. But for the next 4 weeks, I want to share with you 4 modes of worship that you may see in church, you may see outside of church, right? But 4 modes of worship. As a matter of fact, we've got these little icons up on the stage that represent each of those. And so we're going to talk about bringing gifts, right? One week we're going to talk about bringing gifts. One week we're going to talk about pouring out our hearts, that's one of the postures of worship that we have, pouring out our hearts. Christmas Eve, I'm excited because that week is going to be bowing our knees. That one of the postures of worship is when we worship God on bended knee, when we kneel before Him. The Bible says that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess one day that Jesus is the King of the universe. We will all bow our knee to Him. And that's one of the postures of worship. And so this week, week 1, what we're going to talk about is lifting our hands. As a matter of fact, everybody just real quick, just put your hands in the air. Go, touchdown. All right, because I know some of y'all worship that way. Put your hands back down, right? You know, we want to worship God in lots of different ways. And I know some of you, that may have been the first time you've raised your hands in church ever because I forced you to, right? You know, some of you grew up in churches where, like me, either you've never been to church before, or you grew up in churches where basically nobody ever raised their hand. There's very little clapping except at the end of the Christmas cantata after all the kids come up and the choir does their thing and, the final song, the big note at the end, everybody claps, and there's a standing ovation. But other than that, you didn't do a whole lot of clapping. You didn't do a whole lot of raising of hands. I mean, that's pretty much the way that I grew up. I didn't do that much probably until college, really, and then afterward. And so you may come in, especially if you're new to church, and you see people like maybe my wife on the front row or me on the front row or other people around the church raising your hands, and sometimes you feel a little awkward. Right? Maybe you wonder if you're new to church, like, why do people do that, right? That's what this week is all about. So there's a Christian comedian named Tim Hawkins. Some of y'all probably heard Tim Hawkins. You may have even seen this sketch. I don't have a video to show you. But he does this, part of his comedy routine years ago was about actually people raising their hands in church, right? And he gave them names. I'm not going to remember all of them. But, he kind of says, you start out maybe with your hands in your pocket. You sort of kind of, just sort of flap your elbows, as you're worshiping. Just, kind of, you're warming up a little bit, right? You're kind of getting into the music, warming up. And then he says, then you do like the TV carry, right? You're just holding the TV. And then some of us, we have widescreens, and you're holding the TV, you're worshiping God. And then he says, then some of you, you do like my fish is this big. And you're just worshiping God, and then some of you are liars, and your fish is really not really that big, but you're out here, right? And we raise our hands that way. And then he talks about the goalposts, right? Some of us, we worship God with the goalpost, throw in a little bit of heartburn, goalpost, maybe double heartburn back to the goalpost, just worshiping God that way, right? You worship God. Some of you, it's a one-handed thing. You kind of give God a high five. Sometimes you say Jesus is number 1, right? And give Him a high five, maybe a little rock fist, right? And then you kind of get to the big 3 at the end. You've got YMCA, Rocky, and touchdown, right? No, nobody thinks that's funny. Anyway, you see people worshiping, you see people raising their hands. Sometimes it feels a little awkward. But the Bible actually talks about us raising holy hands to worship. As a matter of fact, the way that the Bible describes worship, I can't describes raising hands as a posture of worship. I can't help but thinking that when we raise our hands, it's something that we do with our hands that's a reflection of what's actually going on in our hearts. When we raise our hands to worship, what we do with our hands is a reflection of what's going on in our hearts. And the reality is, like, you know, if you're a sports fan and you watch sports and there's like something going on, you want somebody to block the shot, and you're like, you know, block the shot, you know, you're watching basketball or you know, they've scored a touchdown and they're about to kick an extra point or a field goal or something like that. You might, you know, if you're sitting beside my wife, you might hear her say, Nix, 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 Nix. You know, she's got like her fingers crossed, and I think her toes are crossed, and she's crossing her legs, and she's hoping that the other team doesn't make it, because what she's doing with her hands, what she's doing with her body, that's a reflection of what's going on here. She wants her team to win, and then when they score the touchdown, it's touchdown or victory, right? And you cheer for that because it excites you. And so in worship, when we raise our hands, what we're doing is we're showing the world around us, and we're showing God, there's something going on in my heart. This song is speaking to me. God, you are speaking to me. God, I want to praise you. I want to pray to you. I want to raise my hands because I want you and the world to see there's something going on. There's something going on in here. And so I want us to look at Psalm 63 this morning. We're going to look at a couple of different passages, a couple of different examples. We're going to start in the Old Testament, back to the New, and probably back to the Old. But in Psalm chapter 63, verses 1 through 4, we see this Psalm of David. And in verse 4, he's going to raise his hands. But I want you to see what David is going through. So in verse 1, he says, "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you." Now listen to this. "In a dry and parched land where there is no water." Listen, what's going on for David is he's longing for God, and a lot of us, we're longing for God, but this is not Christmas morning with lots of presents for David. He's in a dry and parched land, probably physically, but also emotionally, spiritually. He feels alone. Sometimes we are alone. We feel alone. We go through struggles in life. We want life to be perfect, but life's not perfect. Sometimes it feels dry. It feels desolate. We feel rejected. We might feel afraid. We think something like this, especially as we go into the Christmas season. And this Christmas is really not the way that you want it to be. You might be thinking this Christmas season, like, I never expected to be here in life. David, probably when he was a young boy and even a young man, never really expected to be where he was, a hunted man. Not hunted because he was a criminal, hunted because God had chosen him. And Saul is trying to track him down and kill him. And David is in this dry, desolate, lonely place of rejection and maybe a place of fear. And you may be thinking this morning, like, I didn't expect to be here. As I'm going into the holidays, I never expected Christmas to look this way. I didn't expect my finances to look this way or my family to look this way. I didn't think I was going to be here where I am today. But he goes on to say in verse 2, "I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory." Right? He's worshiping God. Even in the middle of the desolation, he's worshiping God. "I've beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live. And in your name, I will do what? I will lift up my hands." See, David is experiencing God. He is trusting God in the middle of possibly the worst time of his life. If not the worst, it's definitely in the top 3, right? And even though his circumstances are horrible, David does not get overwhelmed by his circumstances to the point that he ignores God, to the point that he runs from God, to the point that he blames God. Instead, in spite of his circumstances, he says, God, I've experienced you. I've been in your sanctuary. I've experienced your power. I've seen your glory. Your grace is on my life. God, even in the midst of where I am today, I'm going to praise you. I'm going to worship you. Listen, Christmas can kind of be a magnifier in your life. This holiday season, it seems like Christmas can take, if you're in a really good spot, it can take the good times of life and make them really, really good, really, really special, right? That you can really have some great memories with your families. But we know, especially if you or somebody you know maybe has even experienced loss around Christmas time, that the holidays, Christmas in particular, as a magnifier, can even take something that's not a great moment in life, something that's a sad, terrible, bad moment in life, and it can magnify it and make it really, really hard at Christmas. And what we have to remember is that God is still God. God is still in charge. And if we're living this lifestyle of worship and we're going to live this lifestyle of obedience to God, then we can still raise our hands to God and say, God, I'm still trusting you. I'm still surrendering my life to you. I'm still putting you in charge, God. I'm going to lift my hands to you because, God, I need you. That's what David is saying. He's saying, God, I need you. I'm longing for you. I'm thirsting for you in this dry and desolate land. It's an act of worship. Listen, I was here one time. Maybe not as bad of circumstances as maybe some of you have been in, but when I was in law school, actually I had just finished law school, and I was studying to take the Mississippi bar. And just in case some of you don't know, I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Mississippi. I'm inactive. I don't practice. But Stephanie was pregnant with George, our first child. As a matter of fact, with Grayson. George is our last child. He's our youngest, with Grayson. And I think she had him. As I was studying for the bar, right, getting ready for that, she scheduled that so that, around the bar test, whatever. But we were living here, and I was, traveling down to the Jackson area for these bar reviews, and I'd be going 2 or 3 days at a time, stay in really cheap hotels, where like there's dogs barking everywhere and sirens going off, and there may or may not be iron stains in the carpet, those kinds of places, where you definitely don't, if you drop it, you just leave it. You don't even pick it up, much less eat it. You don't even want to touch it. Those kind of places, right? So I was down for a bar review, studying, and I was in one of those hotels, and I was just not in a great place. I'd been interviewing, trying to find jobs. I got a new baby, and I can't remember if he was born yet or if he wasn't born yet. I don't remember. But I just came to this moment where, like David, I felt depressed. I felt desperate. I had this I didn't know what to do. And literally, the language that I used to God was, God, what the hell am I doing here? God, you got to give me a sign. You've got to help me out. I don't know what tomorrow, God, I don't know. And I'm just telling you, like that night in the hotel room, I was a Christian. I was involved in ministry. There were great things. My beautiful wife, either baby boy or about to be a baby boy. There's some great things going on in my life. But at that moment, I felt just completely separate from it. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what was going to happen. How am I going to provide? Like I'd quit my job to go to law school, and like it's time for a job because she's about to quit her job to have this baby. Like something's got to happen, God. And I just remember I'm down on my knees and I'm praying to God, and my hands are up because, listen, without even it wasn't like I was in church, just doing what a lot of ladies try to, want to do. They want to wash the windows, right? Praising God that way. No, that's not what it was about. It was about me on my knees going, God, there's something going on in my heart, and I just need help. And so, God, as I'm kneeling here and my hands are up, you got to help me, God. You got to come through. Show me what you want me to do. You're in charge, God. My whole life is yours. I'm trusting you, but I don't know what to do. And I would love to tell you that in that moment, there was just this sense of peace that washed over me and everything was better. It wasn't, right? But then I got back home after the bar review and there was an email waiting for me. And what I didn't know in that moment is I'm praying to God and raising my hands and trusting him that God was at work in the background. And I had an email for an interview, which turned into a job offer, which changed the course, the trajectory of my life from law to children's ministry full time. And I spent years in that. And I don't know if that email would have been waiting for me if I hadn't given everything to God, if I hadn't had that sort of come to Jesus moment or not. Maybe it would have. But I'm just telling you, sometimes when you're in that spot where you don't know what to do, you raise your hands to God. Say, God, you're in charge. It's not just about sitting on the pew on Sunday morning, waving to God and saying, high five, you're number one. Sometimes it's God, you are in charge. Listen, in those moments when you give God control and you see the mercy and the grace of God in your life, David experienced God's mercy and he experienced God's grace. I've experienced God's mercy and God's grace. You can't experience God's grace and not show gratitude and not be thankful to God for that. And that's one of the ways that we do it. We raise our hands to God and say, God, I am thankful for you. Thank you so much for coming through. It's like touchdown, right? God, I mean, we scored. We have to show some gratitude. That's one of the reasons that we raise our hands to God is because we want to thank God. In the New Testament, Paul is talking to Timothy, right? And this is another reason why we raise our holy hands. In 1 Timothy 2:8, Timothy's a young pastor, and Paul's his mentor. He's giving him some instructions. And as this young preacher, Timothy's learning from Paul. And in 1 Timothy 2:8, Paul writes this. He says, therefore, I want men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. I want men everywhere. Guys, I want you to tune into this for a second. A lot of times in the Bible, you'll read the word man or mankind, and you'll understand either from the context or really from the original language, the way that the word is put together in the Hebrew or the Greek or whatever, we'll understand that really just kind of means people, right? This is just, in the context, he's not just talking to men, he's really talking to mankind, and this means everybody. That's not this verse. Men, this word means men. This is for us. I don't know why Paul said to Timothy, I want men to raise hands. I want men to put their hands up, not with anger or disputing, but I want them to raise their hands, lifting up holy hands in prayer. And Timothy, that's what I want. That's what I want you to instruct the men to do. I don't know exactly why Paul singled out men to raise them. Not that women can't do that, but why he singled out men to tell Timothy to raise their hands. One possibility is that guys, we're probably the least likely to do it, right? When we're sitting at church, when we're sitting on the pews, we may feel a little bit awkward, keep our hands in our pockets, our arms crossed, whatever. You may or may not sing. Whether you can sing well or you can't sing well, it doesn't matter. But you can raise your hands. You see, if you're a dad, one of our jobs, as we've talked about before, is to take what's in my heart, right? Deuteronomy chapter 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and then repeat these commands again and again to your kids. You're supposed to take the love that's in our hearts and the commands, the laws, the instructions that God has given us, and we're supposed to pass them on to our kids. Listen, if you want your children to seek after God, you have to be the kind of dad who's also seeking after God. If you want your kids to raise their hands and to see you worship, and you want your kids to become worshipers, dads, they need to see you worshiping. Don't let your wives out-worship you. Men, we set the example. What Paul is saying to Timothy is, men, you are setting the standard. What's the standard that you're setting? Our standard is we are going to have a heart for God. Men, we are going to have a heart for God. Because what's happening in my heart, it's coming out through my hands. Whatever's going on in here, God, I'm showing you. Whether I'm seeking after you, whether I'm praising you, whether I'm hurting, I'm praying to you. Men, we're raising our hands. We're setting the standard in our families. Don't let your wives out-worship you. Don't let your kids out-worship you. Raise your hands in worship. You don't have to do it all the time, but listen, I'm just encouraging you guys, loosen up a little bit. When there's something going on in life, raise your hands. Just do the rock fist, right? Just stand there like this. That's fine. You can be a statue. You can be Rocky. But Paul says, tell the men. They're in charge. They're setting the standard for everybody else. Raise hands to God. Listen, I can't prove that this is true biblically, but based on the fact that God has created us in His image, and God is our heavenly Father, I believe that God is pleased when we raise our hands to Him because we're His children. And guys, you may be the kind of guy that you're like, I don't really like kids. I don't really like babies. When a new mom comes in with a baby, your wife's like, oh, it's a baby. Oh, how cute, how sweet. Let me hold it. Most guys are not like, oh, how cute, how sweet. Let me hold it, right? We're just not programmed that way, right? We're not moms. We don't have that programming inside of us. I'm not saying it's weird if guys do that, but most guys don't do that. But here's what dads will do with their own kids, right? Even if like babies scare them and they don't know how to change the diapers, and so they don't really do that much when they're. As a matter of fact, there's some dads talking about this morning, some moms and dads. When that baby, the first time that baby becomes a toddler, right? And it's, learning to walk, and it does kind of the Frankenstein, and says, dad, 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 as it's learning to walk. There's not a father on the planet whose heart does not melt when the toddler, not the baby anymore, the toddler says, dad, 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 dad. Yes, what do dads do? They hold out their hands, they get down on their knees, like, come on, buddy. Come on, sweetheart. Come to daddy. Just keep saying dad, dad. Don't say mama, mama, mama. Say dad, 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 right? Because it melts us. Listen, I can't prove it, but I think that's kind of the way that God feels for us. And men, God feels that way about us. We're His sons. Ladies, you're His daughters. But God is saying, come on, buddy, you can do a great job. Just keep moving forward. As we raise our hands to Him, He moves closer to us. Listen, when our hands move toward God, I believe that God's heart moves toward us, right? When the baby has got his hands up and kind of doing the Frankenstein walk, we move toward, like if it starts to fall, what do? We reach in and we try to scoop them up, right? When we raise our hands to God, God's heart moves toward us. James 4:8 talks about this. The New American Standard Translation says this: draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. So when we raise our hands, what we're saying is, God, like David, I need you. I want to draw closer to you. I want to praise you. I want to worship you. I need you in my life. God, I'm coming closer to you. And God draws closer to us. Another reason that we raise our hands is that sometimes we're just offering praise to God. Go back to the Old Testament in Psalm 141. David writes this. He says, "O Lord, I am calling to you. Please hurry. Listen when I cry to you for help." It's another one of those psalms of help. But then in verse 2 it says, "Accept my prayer as incense offered to you, and my upraised hands as an evening offering." And we talk about bringing our tithes and offerings, and yeah, we're talking about money then. But that's not the only thing that we give to God as an offering. We give Him our hearts. But what David is saying is, listen, I'm raising my hands as an offering to you. So what am I offering? Me. God, I'm giving you me. I'm giving you my all. God, I'm raising my hands to you. Take it as an offering. That's one of the reasons that we raise our hands. Another reason that we lift our hands to God is that sometimes we're declaring battle. And we need God's help. And I'm wondering if, some of you in this Christmas and this holiday season, like you either need to, want to, or have already declared war, declared battle on something in your life that you as we've talked over the last couple of weeks, like God's shown you something that you need to get out of your life. You need to stop doing, or maybe you need to start doing, and you want to fight for that. You want to fight for your family, right? You want to fight against the addiction that's going on. You want to fight to save a marriage. You want to fight to restore your relationship with your parents or your brothers or your sisters or your kids, right? And so you're gonna battle for that. And sometimes when we're raising our hands, what we're doing is we're declaring battle. This happened in Exodus chapter 17. What's going on in Exodus chapter 17 is you've got Moses, you've got the Israelites, and they're battling against the Amalekites. And so Moses says to Joshua, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go up on top of the mountain. I'm going to take my staff with me. I'm going to raise my hands. And when I got my hands up, we're going to win the battle, right? So in Exodus 17, 10, 11, it says, so Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. Moses is saying, look, as long as I got my hands up, we're winning. And God was doing a miracle. But what Moses was saying, what Joshua and Aaron and Hur, what the Israelites were saying is, God, we're raising our hands to you because we're declaring battle. We've got an enemy that we need to defeat. God, you're fighting for us. But what happened to them is what often happens to us, right? They were winning. They were losing. They were winning. They were losing, right? In verse 2, it says, as long as Moses had his arms up, they were winning. But when his arms would come down, they were losing. Why were they losing? Because Moses was getting tired. Sometimes we go to battle. We're fighting for our families. We're fighting against addiction. We're fighting to keep our sanity in the holiday season. And sometimes we're losing because we get tired. And we're tired because we don't have anybody else to help us. We've not relied on other people. Maybe we haven't asked for help. Maybe we're surrounded by the wrong people. And so that's part of what church is all about. We come together and we worship together so that we can build these small groups, so that we can have a church family that we can rely on, so that we can have friends in our lives. I'm not saying don't ever make friends with somebody outside of church. We should do that. We should influence them. We should be in the world but not of the world. But as our Christian brothers and sisters, right? We have this family that can surround us, that can help hold us up. And as it goes on, in verse 12, it says, when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone, they put it under him, and he sat on it. And then Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with a sword. With Aaron on one hand and Hur on the other, holding Moses' hands up, the Israelites won. Listen, when we're in battle and we're fighting by ourselves and we're losing because we're trying to do it all on our own, we need to be able to ask other people for help. We need to not have so much pride, but say, listen, here's what I'm doing. I'm living a lifestyle of obedience to God. I want to get my life back on track. I want to get my family back on track. I want to restore these relationships in Jesus' name. And so I need help. Can you just help lift me up? Lift me up in prayer. Help me hold my hands up as I'm crying out to God and declaring battle. I want to declare victory too. So would you help me hold my hands up? Sometimes we just need to have the humility so that like Moses, like Aaron, like Hur, like Joshua, we can win with a winning team around us. So we raise our hands as a battle cry to God. Some of you are in a battle right now, and what you just need to say to God, like David in the first psalm that we read, is simply, God, I need you. Sometimes when we're singing and you see maybe me and Stephanie on the front row and others around us, but I just use us as an example. Sometimes, Nathan and the band, they'll be singing a song, and I'm moved to just kind of worship God and raise hands, but sometimes it's like, man, this song is hitting me. Right? God, I need you in this moment. And so sometimes my hands go up because it's just, God, this is the cry of my heart. I need you. Throughout history, there's really been two primary reasons that people raise their hands, right? The first one, everybody raises their hands in victory. When it's the winning team, the winning shot, when somebody wins the fight, wins the battle, what does everybody do? You raise a flag, you raise your hands, right? Yes, we won. We're going to run through the crowd with our flag. We're going to raise our banner. We're going to raise our standard. And we're going to raise our hands. Woohoo! We won, right? We raise our hands in victory. And the other reason throughout history that people have raised their hands is, what do you do if somebody pulls a gun out and aims it at you? Hands up, surrender, right? We raise our hands in victory and we raise our hands in surrender. The beautiful thing about worship, the beautiful thing about God, about this posture of worship, whether you're in a tough time, a winning time, the beautiful thing about this posture of worship is that you do the same at the same time. You are declaring victory and surrender. At the moment that you surrender to God, you will find victory in Him. At the moment that you say, God, I need your help, and I'm giving it all to you, whatever happens today, whatever happens tomorrow, God, you are in charge. I am surrendering to you. At the moment that you do that is when you can say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Because you're no longer strengthening yourself. You're relying on Jesus, who is giving you the strength to fight the battle. Like Aaron, like Moses, like her, like Joshua, you're relying on God to win the battle for you. It may not happen overnight, but listen, the only way that you're going to win those battles is when you surrender to God and you find victory in Him. So this Christmas season, regardless of what else is going on, I just want to encourage you to lift hands. Raise your hands to God in surrender, in victory, in prayer, to set an example for your kids, to not let your wife out-worship you or your kids out-worship you. Because the closer we get to God, the more He draws toward us, because we want to show God that what's going on in our hearts, we're letting it out in our hands. We're saying, God, we need you. We belong to you. You are our Heavenly Father. Step into our lives. I just want you, God. That's what raising holy hands is all about. It's putting God in charge.